In the Torah portion of Ki Teitzei, we speak of the commandment to return an item of lost property. It's in chapter 22, verse 3. You should do the same with any lost property of your brother, which he has lost and you have found. You should not turn a blind eye to it. Now, how terrible would it be if you did turn a blind eye to it and ignored this biblical command? Rabbi Isaac Luria, the esteemed 16th century Kabbalist, wrote that this would be very calamitous in consequences. You see, there's two reasons your soul might have to come back into this world. It might have to come back for a full lifespan, which we call full reincarnation, Gilgul, or if you don't have to fix so much from your previous life, you didn't do too much wrong, it could just pop back for a shorter period of ibur, impregnation, where it would join another soul that's already in a body and help it along for a period of time. It's a bit like a lease. Gilgul is like a freehold where a soul takes full acquisition of a body, and ibur is more like a leasehold where it just goes in for a shorter period. But Isaac Luria wrote that failure to observe the commandment of returning out of lost property would require a full Gilgul, a full reincarnation for an entire lifetime, which actually is quite painful for a soul. Souls don't want to come back into this world once they're in heaven, and to come back for a full lifetime is much more distressing than coming back for a short period. So be careful about this one, about returning lost property. Chapter 22, verse 8, we read about the commandment to build a guardrail on top of a piece of property to prevent someone falling off that flat roof and, God forbid, dying. Now, this is pretty straightforward, obviously. It's a law aimed at health and safety. But what's the Kabbalistic meaning? What's the spiritual meaning? Fascinatingly, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the famous 16th century Kabbalist, writes an astonishing insight. He says that this world that we live in and all the spiritual structures above it actually constitute what you could call a three-story building. We inhabit the lower story, which is called the world of Asiyah, the world of action. That's where we live. Then there's another realm inhabited by angels and all sorts of different beings called the world of Yitzirah, the world of formation. And finally, you have at the very top a third story, which is called the world of Bria, the world of creation, because that's where the creative process begins in its very early stages. That's the three-story structure. We have to build a fence, says Rabbi Isaac Luria, surrounding that structure to prevent the lights above it, God's immediate light called Atzilut, which means emanation, but it's also derived from the Hebrew word Etzel, which means next to. It's the light immediately next to God. And we have to build a guardrail on the created world to prevent the lights of Atzilut falling down and dying. Yes, that's what Rabbi Isaac Luria says, that the lights might fall down and die. Now, I know what you're thinking. What on earth does this mean? How can a light fall down and die? So I'll give you a simple example. You're giving a speech to an entire assembled group of people, and you have the most brilliant idea. You're enlightened with the most brilliant idea. And all of a sudden, you start talking, and it's a flop. You just can't, you just can't say it properly. You didn't give it the right dignity, you didn't give it the right articulation, you didn't explain things properly, and it just pops out of your mouth, you've said it, and you see all these stony faces. That's a kind of example of a light dying. You had this brilliant, inspired idea, and it just died because it didn't carry the right baggage with it. It didn't carry the right articulation. And that's what can happen with the lights of Atzilut. If they don't express themselves properly through the fabric of the worlds, they can die. So the lesson's very clear, really. It's on a practical level that when you have brilliant inspiration, when you have great ideas to share with people, it's important to spend a good amount of time fleshing out those ideas and giving them the right, anecdotal background to research them rigorously and give them the meat that they need for your audience to appreciate them properly. Let's move on. Chapter 23, verse 20. This is the prohibition of charging interest. Now, I'm going to tell you an insight from Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who's passed away exactly 250 years ago this year. He posed the question, why is your shirt, and not someone else's shirt? How comes the pieces of property that you end up with actually end up belonging to you and not to someone else? What's the real reason? So he proposed this idea that everything has a spark inside it. Every piece of property contains very unique spiritual sparks. And what's more, they're tailor-made for you. In other words, the items of property which you end up owning, the reason why that's the case by divine providence is because the sparks in those objects are personalized to you. And that is why you're not allowed to charge interest, because the Torah is really giving you a guide how to find your sparks. The sparks are money too. If you charge interest from someone else's money, you're trying to get sparks that don't really belong to you. And therefore, that's wrong. Only try and get the sparks which the Torah, the Code of Jewish Law, tells you to, not only because that's ethical and that's moral, but it's really telling you a spiritual destiny. It's a guide from above telling you how to interact with the objects in this world which you are destined to do so. Chapter 25, verses 5 to 10, we have this interesting commandment of levirate marriage. And what that is if a man passes away, he has a wife, but he didn't have any kids, there's a commandment that his brother should marry this lady in order to perpetuate his name. Now, what's going on here? Why is this so important? Modern people such as ourselves find this hard to understand, the importance of this commandment. So, Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel said the following in his tractate Nishmat Chaim, which is a tractate on reincarnation, about the mitzvah, the commandment of levirate marriage. He said that if a man passes away, didn't have any children, his soul wants to be perpetuated. So that can either be through a child or through reincarnation. And as I mentioned before, reincarnation is a painful experience. We like to avoid it. The point of levirate marriage is to save this poor soul from having to be reincarnated because he didn't have any kids. If his brother will marry his wife after he passed away and have a child, then, said Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel, he will be saved the need to be reincarnated. Finally, the spiritual message for this week. Parshat Ki Teitzei, the Torah portion of Ki Teitzei, is remarkable in that it contains an enormous amount of commandments. 72 of the 613 commandments are found in this week's Torah portion. So I think it's time to reflect on the meaning of a commandment. The very fact we call it a commandment is misleading. Well, of course it is. It's a kind of divine message of how we should fulfill our lives. But the word mitzvah, commandment, also has an Aramaic root from the word safsah, which means connection. Don't just look at a mitzvah as a burden, some obligation from God. It's your connection. It's your connection with your soul. It's a connection with God. Mitzvot, the commandments, are really a sacred technology which connect you with the infinite. They connect you with the universe. And here, as we're approaching the end of the Torah and reading all this mitzvot, it's a good idea to meditate upon this idea. After all, our soul needs to gush forth. It needs to heal itself of all the judgments we've been through in life and all the judgments we've had against others. We need to connect to a vital source of something which is going to calm our spirit and bring peace to the universe and peace to mankind. And that's really what a mitzvah is. It's a connection. It's connecting with something higher. So your spiritual exercise for the week is to rethink your idea of a mitzvah, not to look at it as a burden, but to look at it as something which is enabling you to fill your potential through connecting you with the higher spirit. Thank you very much, and please join us again next week for Torah in 10.